dinner in total silence. That's how it started that night, or maybe how it ended. The food was warm, I remember that. The plates were full. The table wiped clean, the lights above casting a soft yellow over everything. I had even made that stew they used to fight over as kids, the one with too much garlic, the kind that filled the whole house with the smell of something comforting. But now, the only thing filling the room was silence. Forks tapped, water glasses clinked, someone scrolled through a phone, and no one looked at me, not once. I sat there folding my hands in my lap like I always had, smiling when someone made a half joke, passing the salt before anyone even asked. I was there, part of the furniture, not a mother, not a person, just the background hum that kept things moving. I asked how their days were. I listened carefully to every word, nodding, murmuring approval, but no one asked how I was, not out of cruelty. That's the part that stings the most. It wasn't cruelty. It was habit. They had grown so used to my silence that they no longer noticed it. In that moment, I realized they didn't even expect me to speak, and perhaps that was worse than being ignored. I watched my daughter slice into her bread and chew without lifting her eyes. My son-in-law mentioned work stress. My granddaughter talked about a new show she was watching. I kept nodding, kept smiling, even laughed once. But inside I was screaming, not loud, not angry, just the kind of scream that happens when your heart pushes against your ribs trying to find a way out. Because this wasn't about one dinner. This was years, decades of giving so much of myself that there was barely anything left to notice. I wanted someone to notice. I remember my eyes drifting to the empty chair at the far end of the table, the one where my husband used to sit. He wasn't a talkative man either, but his presence had weight. Even in silence, he'd glance at me, a small nod, a knowing look. We'd sit in companionable quiet. But now the quiet was no longer companionable. It was suffocating. No one was cruel. No one meant harm. But the harm was there, seeping into my bones like cold air that never quite goes away. I had taught them that I didn't need to be asked. I had shown them over and over again that I would give without question, without condition. I trained them to believe I had no needs at all, and they believed me. I cleared the plates after dinner like always. Someone muttered, "Thanks, Grandma," but didn't look up from their phone. The sound of a sitcom buzzed from the living room as they migrated away full and distracted. I stood at the sink and washed the dishes in warm water, letting my hands linger under the stream longer than necessary, because that was the only warmth I felt. It hit me then not like a slap, but like a slow unraveling, a thread being pulled loose from a sweater. The realization that I had disappeared in front of them, not all at once, but piece by piece. Every time I didn't speak, I disappeared a little more. Every time I swallowed a feeling, I slipped further into the background, and now all that remained was a woman no one needed to ask about. A woman they knew would keep going, keep giving, never ask, never cry, never break. But I was already broken. I dried the dishes and put them away in their proper places. The clock above the stove ticked gently, the kind of tick that sounds like a heartbeat if the room is too quiet. I sat down at the small kitchen table with a cup of tea, letting the steam rise into my face, hoping it would hide the wetness in my eyes. I thought of speaking, just something small. Maybe telling them that I'd like someone to sit with me for a few minutes. Maybe mentioning that I felt tired lately. But my throat tightened. The words swam in my mouth and then dissolved. I had spent so many years silencing myself, I no longer knew how to unmute. I don't blame them, I really don't. That's the strangest part. I love them, fiercely. I would still give them everything if they asked. But what I've come to realize is that they were raised by a woman who taught them that love is service, and service is silence. I gave them my silence like it was gold, and they accepted it, not knowing what it cost me. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how many dinners had gone that way, how many moments passed where I wished someone would ask, "How are you, Mom?" and how each time they didn't, I convinced myself it wasn't important, that I was just being sensitive, that love was about being strong, being steady, being silent. But strength without voice is just suffering with a ribbon on it. I stared at the ceiling, the moonlight drawing faint lines across the plaster. I remembered a time when laughter filled our home, when I would tell stories and they would lean in eyes wide, when they wanted my opinion, when they needed me not just for laundry and lunches but for the sound of my voice. Somewhere along the line, I stopped offering it, and they stopped looking for it. That dinner table will always be full, but I'm not sure I will ever feel full there again, unless something changes, unless I change. Not loudly, not suddenly, but maybe quietly. I'll begin to speak again, too, even if it's only to myself at first. I remember the first time I truly learned not to speak, not just to keep quiet for a moment or to hold my tongue in an argument. No, this was different. I was maybe 10, maybe 11, old enough to understand shame, young enough to believe it was my fault. It happened in a crowded room. Someone raised their voice, not even at me, just near me, and I saw the look on my mother's face, blank composed. She didn't flinch. She didn't defend. She just swallowed it and smiled, as if it didn't sting. I didn't understand then that what I was witnessing wasn't grace, it was erasure. That night she told me a woman keeps peace by keeping quiet. I think that sentence dug its roots so deep in me that even now, decades later, I still find it tangled around my ribs. So I practiced. I practiced silence like it was an art. When friends made fun of me, I laughed it off. When teachers overlooked me, I didn't raise my hand. When I was scared or angry or confused, I turned inward, curling myself around the feelings so no one else had to see them. I became a quiet girl, then a quiet woman, the kind of quiet that makes others feel comfortable. I was rewarded for it. That's the dangerous part. People liked me more when I didn't ask for much. I was called easygoing mature for my age, a good listener. I began to associate my silence with worth. The less I took up space, the more lovable I seemed to be. Even when I fell in love, I led with softness. I made it easy. I learned what he liked. I watched his moods. I memorized his silences so I could avoid them. And when I hurt quietly. I thought that's what love was, making sure the other person never had to see the parts of you that might be hard to carry. When I became a mother, that belief solidified. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who burdened her children. I didn't want to be a storm in the house. I wanted to be the sun through the window, warm, always there, never too much. So when the nights were long and I felt like crying from exhaustion, I didn't. I sang lullabies instead. When I missed meals to stretch the groceries, I told them I'd already eaten. When I felt invisible, I convinced myself that meant I was doing motherhood right, selfless, tireless, silent. But silence isn't noble. It's just lonely in a prettier dress. Looking back, I don't know if anyone ever asked me to be that way. That's the hardest truth to admit. No one forced me into quiet. I walked into it willingly, dressed it up like strength, and wore it every day until it became a second skin. I wore it so well that even I forgot I had a voice underneath it. I remember sitting at the park bench once, years ago, watching other mothers talk to each other, laugh with their friends. One of them was upset she was venting, waving her hands around, telling someone off in a firm voice. And I felt a sharp pain in my chest, not from disapproval, but from longing. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to say I'm tired and have someone say me too. I wanted to be known, not just relied on. But I didn't approach them. I smiled politely, nodded, then went home and cooked dinner. It wasn't just my children I was silent with. It was everyone. Friends, family, even myself. I stopped writing. I used to keep journals when I was younger. Pages filled with observations and secrets and dreams. I stopped around the time my children were born. Not out of time, but out of the growing belief that my inner world no longer mattered. I began to live outside myself in service to everyone else. Even now I catch myself apologizing when I speak. Sorry, just one quick thing. I don't want to be a bother, but this might sound silly, but as if every word that comes from me must be pre-approved by someone else's comfort. Sometimes when I walk past mirrors, I don't recognize the woman looking back. She looks kind, patient, but her eyes are always searching as if she's still looking for the girl who once filled pages with dreams and poems and unspoken anger. That girl is still in there somewhere. She just got quieter with each passing year. I don't blame my children. I don't. They didn't ask me to be silent. They just accepted the version of me I showed them. They learned that I was the steady one, the giver, the background music. And so they never asked me to step into the spotlight. They never knew I wanted to. But now I'm starting to ask myself, what would have happened if I'd spoken up sooner, if I had said, no, I'm tired, or that hurt me, or even just, I need a minute? Would I have been seen as less loving, or would I have simply been seen? Maybe that's what I want most now, to be seen not as a mother or a helper or a gentle presence, but as a full person with sharp edges and soft places with joy and grief and needs of her own. The silence served me once. It kept me safe. It kept others close. But now it's beginning to feel like a room with no windows, and I'm ready to crack it open just a little. Let the light in. Let my voice out. I don't know what I'll say yet, but I'm listening for it. Even a whisper can change everything if it's honest. They used to call me strong. That word strong, it followed me like a badge passed from lips with admiration, sometimes with awe. She's so strong, they'd say when I carried grocery bags in both hands, a baby on my hip and a smile on my face. She never complains, they'd whisper when I stayed up all night during fevers and still made breakfast the next morning. She's a rock, they told each other, especially during the hard years, the lean years, the ones where I had to stretch every dollar like a piece of thin fabric. I believed them. I wore that word like armor, because it meant something to be called strong. It meant I was good. It meant I was useful. It meant I was wanted. And most dangerously of all, it meant I didn't need help. So I never asked for any. Every time I ached, I told myself it was nothing. Every time I wanted to cry, I swallowed it down like spoiled milk and smiled instead. I had learned after all that to be loved, as a woman, especially a mother, you had to make yourself easy to love. And nothing makes people more comfortable than a woman who never needs comforting. But strength, real strength, doesn't come from silence. It doesn't come from swallowing pain and calling it peace. It doesn't come from never asking, never breaking, never being held. I remember one afternoon when my back gave out while lifting a heavy laundry basket. I crumpled to the floor with a sound I didn't recognize. A whimper, maybe. A gasp. I lay there on the cold tile, blinking at the ceiling, and thought I shouldn't have pushed myself so hard. But the next thought, the one that still haunts me, was, if I cry, they'll think I'm weak. So I didn't. I got up. I finished the laundry. And when my husband came home, I smiled and asked how his day was. Not once did I mention what had happened, not because he wouldn't have cared, but because I had trained myself and him to believe I was the one who didn't need help. Sometimes I wonder what they saw when they looked at me all those years. Did they see a woman in full bloom, or did they just see the petals I never let fall? I used to think that being strong meant not letting anyone see me undone, but now in the quiet hours I realize that kind of strength is a trap. It's a cage lined with good intentions, and the more you uphold it, the more invisible you become. People stop checking in. They assume you're fine. They praise your independence. They thank you for not making a fuss. But inside you begin to fade. There were moments, small ones, that should have been signs, like when I stayed up for days planning birthday parties and no one said thank you, or when I cooked 3 meals a day for years and no one ever asked what I wanted to eat, or when I sat alone in waiting rooms because I told them not to worry, that I'd be fine. I thought I was being noble. I thought I was shielding them. But I wasn't. I was disappearing in plain sight. I've come to understand that there's a price for silence, and I paid it willingly, thinking I was buying love or approval or peace. What I bought was loneliness. And it's not their fault. I need to say that again, not for them, but for me. It's not their fault. They only mirrored what I modeled. I was the one who kept smiling through heartache. I was the one who nodded and said I'm fine even when I wasn't. I was the one who turned every request into a whispered apology. I thought I was being strong, but really I was just afraid that if I said how I truly felt, the world would shift, that maybe I wouldn't be loved the same way, that maybe I wouldn't be needed. And when you've spent your life being needed, the idea of being anything else, just yourself, is terrifying. But there's a quiet kind of courage I'm learning now, the kind that doesn't require noise or drama, just truth, just presence, just the willingness to sit with yourself and say I deserved more than I asked for, and maybe it's not too late to ask for something different. Strong women cry too. Strong women say no. Strong women say I can't do this today. They ask for help. They allow themselves to be messy, uncertain, exhausted. They are not made of stone. They are not machines. They are not saints. I wish someone had told me that sooner. I think about the moments I missed, the ones where I could have let myself fall apart just a little, where I could have leaned on someone just once. I think about how much gentler life might have felt if I hadn't tried so hard to be unbreakable. And I think about my daughter, how she calls herself strong now, how she does everything, says nothing, smiles through stress. And I ache for her, because I see it. I see me in her. And I wonder if I pass down silence like an heirloom. Maybe that's why I'm writing all this now. Not to rewrite the past, I can't, but to give the future a different script. Maybe one day she'll read it and know that strength isn't about silence, that love doesn't require erasure, that the softest voice can still be heard if only we believe it deserves to speak. The landline sits on the small table by the window. It's beige, slightly yellowed with age, and still has that long, tangled cord that once stretched across rooms while I cooked with one hand and cradled the receiver with the other. Now it stays, coiled and still. Most days it doesn't ring, and when it does, it's either a telemarketer or the pharmacy confirming a refill. But I leave it there, visible, like some old habit I can't break, a symbol of a time when people needed to reach me. There was a time when the phone rang constantly. School nurses, neighbors, cousins, my children needing advice, my husband checking in. I was the hub, the one everyone called, the voice that could soothe or solve or simply listen. But slowly, almost without notice, the ringing faded. Not all at once, just fewer calls, more silence, longer stretches of waiting, without realizing I was waiting. Now I catch myself glancing at it around mid-morning, then again before dinner. I never admit it to anyone, but a part of me hopes it will ring just once a day, not because someone needs something, but because they thought of me, because they remembered I exist outside of obligation. There's a strange grief in being forgotten softly, not with cruelty, not with rejection, but with neglect so gentle it feels like wind brushing dust off a shelf. No one meant to leave me behind. They just kept moving forward while I stayed where I always was, available, predictable, silent. I don't keep a cell phone close by. I have one somewhere, but the battery's always dead and the screen too small for my hands. I liked the landline. It grounded me. It felt solid. Now it feels like an echo chamber. Sometimes I think I hear it ring only to realize it's a bird outside or a sound from the television. And then I feel foolish. And then I feel sad. I remember one morning last year when I picked up the phone and dialed my daughter's number. I hadn't heard from her in weeks, and something in me, something quiet but urgent, needed to hear her voice. It rang 6 times before voicemail answered. I left a message, just something simple. "Hi, sweetie, just thinking of you. Hope all is well." My voice was steady, cheerful. I practiced it before I spoke. She didn't call back. Not the next day, not the day after. And I didn't try again. I didn't want to seem pushy. I didn't want to be that kind of mother, needy, clingy, emotional. So I pretended it didn't hurt. I busied myself with laundry, baked something I didn't eat, rearranged drawers that didn't need rearranging. But every time I walked past the phone, I hoped. When did I become someone people no longer check on? I wonder that a lot. I know they love me. I truly believe that. But love without presence feels like a story half told. I think my children assume I'm fine because I always said I was. I built a version of myself, so self-sufficient, so endlessly stable, that now they don't know how to approach me with tenderness. Or maybe they don't know I need it. Maybe I've hidden that part of myself so well that even they can't find it anymore. Sometimes I imagine calling them just to say I miss you, but I never do. I get stuck in the space between desire and dignity, wanting to reach out, but also wanting to be wanted without prompting. I crave the simplicity of hearing, "Hey, Mom, how are you today?" without having to earn it through service or sacrifice. I'm not angry at them. That's the most painful part. I can't even be angry. I just feel this slow ache that settles into the corners of everything, like dust in an unused room. A quiet sorrow that comes not from a single wound, but from thousands of tiny moments where I felt invisible and said nothing. I've spent years making it easier for everyone else, making sure they had what they needed, even if it meant silencing myself. But I never taught them how to check on me. I never showed them how to see me as someone with a life beyond them. There's a memory that comes back often from when my youngest was about 8. She had a nightmare and ran into our bedroom crying. I sat up immediately, held her in my arms, stroked her hair. "You're safe," I whispered over and over. "You're safe." That same instinct still lives in me. Even now, I'd do it again. I'd hold her through any storm. But I think I always assumed they'd hold me one day too when I was older, when I was tired, when the silence became too loud. But no one hears silence unless you tell them it's there. So now some days I talk to the phone. I say things out loud just to remind myself I still have a voice. It's cloudy today. The azaleas are blooming again. I wish you'd call. I imagine what I'd say if someone asked how I was. Not the polished version, but the truth. I'm lonely sometimes. I feel forgotten. I miss being needed. I still have so much love to give. And even if the phone never rings again, I think I need to start saying those things to the air, to the window, to myself. Because waiting for someone to hear what you never said out loud is a kind of sorrow I no longer want to live inside. Maybe I'll answer my own silence. Maybe that's where healing begins. I used to think love meant giving everything, and I gave, oh, how I gave. Every corner of my life, every minute of my time, every small and silent joy I once held close, given away piece by piece to the people I loved most. I was the one who stayed up late sewing a costume the night before a school play, the one who walked to work so they could have the car, the one who pretended not to be hungry so there would be enough for seconds, and I never once asked for anything in return, because that's what I thought mothers were supposed to do. I made it a point of pride. I never wanted my children to feel the weight of my sacrifices. I smoothed over everything before it could become a burden. If the shoes were too tight, I bought new ones, even if it meant I wore the same cracked sandals another year. If they forgot something for school, I dropped everything to bring it, even if it meant missing my own appointment. I used to think that if I just kept giving, they'd understand how much I loved them. They'd remember. But now I see it clearly. When you make love invisible, no one learns to recognize it. They don't know that I sometimes skipped meals because the money didn't stretch far enough, that I wore old bras with worn-out hooks and mended the same blouses over and over because they needed new clothes for picture day, that I stood in line at pawn shops more than once, with trembling hands trading away things I cherished so they could feel proud at school, at church, at prom. I remember the winter I pawned my wedding ring, told them I'd just misplaced it. I smiled even then. They never noticed. And how could they? I wrapped every sacrifice in silence, tied it with a bow of reassurance. Don't worry, I'm fine. I already ate. No need to get me anything. I made it so easy for them not to see. I didn't want them to carry guilt. I wanted their memories of childhood to be warm, safe, happy. And they are. They tell me so now. They say things like, "We had such a great childhood, and you always made it look easy." And I smile because I'm glad. I really am. But sometimes after they leave, I sit at the kitchen table and wonder what it would have felt like to be noticed. Really noticed. For someone to look at me and say, "Mom, are you okay? Are you tired? What do you need?" That question never came. Maybe it's not fair to expect it now. Maybe that's not what parenting is about. But it's hard to quiet the ache, the quiet craving, to be on the receiving end just once. To be cared for not because I asked, I never would, but because they saw me. Because they wanted to. I know I'm partly to blame. I swallowed my needs so completely that even I forgot what they were. Somewhere along the way, I stopped making wish lists, stopped buying myself anything that wasn't on sale, stopped thinking about what made me happy. I became someone who existed entirely for the happiness of others. But the problem with disappearing like that is eventually people stop looking for you. I remember a day when my daughter was home visiting. She was tired, overwhelmed with work and her kids, and I listened. Like I always did. I made her tea, ran her a bath, let her rest. She never asked about me, not once. And I didn't expect her to. I just stroked her hair, like I used to when she was a little girl, and whispered, "You're doing so well." But that night, when I lay in bed alone, I thought, what would it feel like to have someone stroke my hair and say, "You've done enough. Rest now." I wept into the pillow, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of all I had carried, without ever being offered a place to put it down. That's the thing about selfless love. It's beautiful, but it can be dangerous. Because if you never show your needs, people assume you have none. And if you never let anyone see your exhaustion, they believe you never get tired. I didn't want to be seen as weak. But now I wish I had let myself be seen as human. These days, I'm starting to look at those small choices with clearer eyes. The times I didn't sit at the table, choosing instead to eat standing over the sink. The birthdays I insisted weren't a big deal. The illnesses I pushed through without a word. I thought I was protecting them. But maybe I was also protecting myself from the vulnerability of being known. It's not too late, I hope. I'm learning that there's still time to show myself to them, not with grand declarations, but with tiny, truthful moments, saying, actually, I could use a hand today. Or that story you just told reminded me of something I miss. Or even just, thank you for sitting with me. I don't expect them to fix anything. I just want to be real in front of them. Not the tireless giver, just me. Because love isn't just about giving. It's about sharing space, truth, presence. And I think I've earned that much. I bought myself a small cake last year. Just one of those single-serving kinds from the grocery store with too much frosting and a sugar rose on top. Vanilla, because chocolate felt too indulgent. I waited until everyone had gone to bed, not that they would have remembered, not that anyone had asked. I lit a candle, just one, and in the glow of the tiny flame I whispered, "Happy birthday," to myself, alone. That was the first birthday in my life where no one said anything, no calls, no cards, no jokes about getting old, no hugs, just silence like any other day. But it wasn't any other day. It was mine. And I hadn't felt that kind of forgotten before, not so completely, not so quietly. I sat there for a long time, looking at that flickering light. I didn't even make a wish. What would I wish for? That someone would magically remember, that the phone would ring, that I'd hear a key in the door and see someone walk in with flowers, even just gas station ones. But none of that happened. I ate 2 bites of the cake, then pushed it aside. Too sweet, too heavy. I cleaned up without a sound, threw away the wrapper, washed the single plate and fork, and in that moment, it wasn't about the cake or the candle. It was about what it meant that I had become so silent, so invisible, that even the day I entered the world went unnoticed. The next morning, my granddaughter called, not knowing what day it had been. She needed help with something for school. I gave her everything she needed, smiled through the phone, told her I was happy to help. I didn't mention the birthday. I didn't want to make her feel guilty. I didn't want to spoil the mood. That phrase, spoil the mood, has followed me my whole life. I've sacrificed so many truths to keep the mood light. But something inside me cracked a little that day, not in a way anyone could hear. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there, a soft snap in the chest, a shift, a thought I hadn't let myself think before. Maybe I've been too quiet for too long. I used to believe it was noble to expect nothing. I thought it made me stronger to go unnoticed, that needing nothing was the highest form of love. But now, I'm not so sure. Now I think there's something deeply human, deeply honest about wanting to be remembered, about wanting someone to look at you and say you matter. Because birthdays aren't about cake or candles, they're about acknowledgement. They're a marker of existence, a pause in time when someone says, "I'm glad you're here." And for the first time in my life, I realized I was the only one who said it to me. I walked to the mirror after cleaning up that night and looked into my own eyes. They looked tired, older than last year and lonelier. I whispered again, not happy birthday this time, but I see you. I said it out loud like a small rebellion, like an offering to myself, because no one else had said it, and I didn't want to end the day entirely invisible. In the days that followed, no one mentioned the missed birthday. I didn't remind them. I didn't drop hints or leave out the card from the pharmacy. I just kept going like I always do. But I thought about it every day. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Because something became clear in that silence. I had spent my life making everyone else's birthdays special. I remembered every favorite dessert, every childhood wish, every candle blown out with cheeks full of breath and eyes full of hope. And I had never once asked for anything in return. I remember one year when my son turned 10. I spent all night sewing a makeshift superhero cape because we couldn't afford the real one. I painted his face in the morning and made cupcakes shaped like stars. He still talks about that birthday. He remembers the joy. And I'm glad. But I wonder if somewhere in his heart he knows the cost of that memory. I gave them magic, and now I sit with silence. But I don't say this with anger. I say it because it's the truth. And maybe truth is the first step toward something softer, something freer. Because I've realized that if I want to be seen, really seen, I have to start by seeing myself. If I want them to remember, I have to speak, not in accusation, not in shame, but gently, honestly. Maybe next year I'll say, today's my birthday. Maybe I'll ask someone to sit with me. Maybe I'll even buy a bigger cake, one that's meant to be shared. Or maybe I'll light another single candle, but this time I'll do it not from sadness, but from recognition. Not because no one remembered, but because I did. Because this year I see me, and that is something. She stood at the sink, elbows deep in soapy water. Her shoulders slumped just slightly, and I saw it, the reflection. Not just in the window glass, but in the rhythm of her hands, the way she smiled at her children while they bickered behind her. My daughter, moving through her life with the same quiet I had passed down like a family recipe. She hummed to herself, asked if anyone needed anything, laughed when they teased her. And when her husband asked what she wanted for dinner, she said, "Oh, whatever you all like is fine." I felt something twist in my chest. It was like watching a play I had once performed in every line familiar, and I wanted to step onto the stage and stop her, shake her maybe, tell her it was okay to say, "No, actually, I'd like this." But I stayed still and I smiled when she brought me a cup of tea just like I used to do for my mother, and my mother for hers. The chain is so long I wonder if it will ever break. I watched my daughter serve dinner that night, fixing plates for everyone, before sitting down to eat, the same way I did, the same way she saw me do 1,000 times. I wanted to tell her that love doesn't have to look like servitude, that you can still be good, still be kind, nurturing, strong, and also ask for what you need. But I didn't, not right then, because I recognized that look in her eyes. The one that says I'm tired, but I can't stop. The one that says I don't want to be a burden. The one that says, as long as everyone else is happy, I'll be fine. She had inherited my silence. And in that moment, the grief of it pressed hard against me. Because I didn't just pass down recipes and stories and lullabies. I passed down a blueprint for disappearing. I never told her to silence herself. I didn't have to. She watched me do it. She watched me brush off compliments, hide my tears, pour myself into everyone but me. And children learn what they live. I remember when she was a teenager and I caught her crying in her room. I sat down beside her, and instead of asking what she needed, I said, "You're so strong, just like your mom." I meant it as comfort. But now I wonder if she took it as instruction to be like me, to hold it all in, to wear strength like armor, even when it weighs her down. What if I had said, "You don't have to be strong all the time"? Would she have turned out different? Softer with herself, more willing to speak her mind, to ask for rest, to take up space. Sometimes I wonder how far back it goes. My mother never asked for much either. She cooked, cleaned, took care of us all without a word. I thought she was invincible. But now I see she was just exhausted. The quiet kind of exhausted that doesn't show up in photos, but lives in the way someone sighs when the room is empty. It's taken me so long to realize that generational love is not just what we give, it's what we model. And I modeled a woman who gave everything and asked for nothing, who smiled through hurt, who lit everyone else's path and let herself walk in the dark. And my daughter learned it perfectly. I don't want her to grow old and find herself sitting at a birthday table with a single candle and no one to blow it out with. I don't want her to carry the same ache I've only just begun to name. I want her to be seen, to speak, to claim her joy, her needs, her right to be more than the sum of what she gives. That night after dinner, while the children ran off and the house returned to its soft evening rhythm, I stood beside her in the kitchen. She was washing dishes again, even though I offered. I placed a hand on her back and said gently, "You know you don't always have to do everything." She looked at me surprised. "It's fine, Mom. I don't mind." "I know," I said, "but maybe you're allowed to mind sometimes." She paused, just for a moment. Her hand stilled in the water, and then she smiled, but it was different, smaller, more thoughtful. I don't know how she admitted. And neither did I, not really. But I said, "Maybe we can learn together." It wasn't a grand moment. No tears, no sweeping music. But it was real. And maybe that's how things begin to change, not with a scream, but with a whisper. With one woman seeing another and saying, "I see what you've carried, and you don't have to carry it alone anymore." That night I wrote in my diary something I've started doing again, and I wrote this. I think she's starting to see it, the silence, the cost, and maybe, just maybe, we can end it here. There was a moment, small, so small it wouldn't register to anyone else, but I've replayed it in my mind more times than I can count. It was after a long day, one of those days where everything felt heavier than usual, my legs, my chest, even my voice. The family had come and gone, left dishes in the sink and laughter in the air, the kind that doesn't always reach the person cleaning up afterward. I was standing near the door as they all put on their coats. My granddaughter hugged me quickly already mid-sentence with someone else. My daughter kissed my cheek absently, keys in one hand, purse in the other, and then my son said, "Thanks for everything, Mom." He smiled, warm, familiar. I smiled back, and I almost said something. It was right there, sitting on my tongue, like the first line of a song I'd rehearsed for years. I almost said, "Could you stay just 5 more minutes?" I almost asked. "Would you sit with me just for a little while?" I nearly whispered, "I miss you when you're gone." But I didn't. The moment passed. The door closed. The car engine started. And I stood there, still, my hand resting on the doorknob long after they had driven away. I could hear the clock ticking behind me. I could feel my throat tighten. And I knew that I had just chosen silence again. I told myself it wasn't the right time, that they were tired, that they'd had a long day, that I didn't want to be a burden. But deep down I knew the truth. I was afraid of how it might feel if I asked, and they said no, afraid of the awkwardness, afraid of being too much. So instead, I let the moment slip into the drawer of all the other almosts I've collected over the years. There are so many of them now. Almost told them I was struggling with money. Almost said the loneliness was getting too loud. Almost asked for a hug that lasted longer than politeness required. Each almost is a bruise that never had the dignity of becoming a scar. You can't point to it and say, "That's where it hurt," but it lingers. It settles deep like dust behind furniture, invisible but thick in the lungs. And I wonder how many times have they almost asked me something too. "Are you okay, Mom? Do you need help? What have you been thinking about lately?" Maybe the silence goes both ways. Maybe they too are afraid of what might spill out if the door opens even an inch. But someone has to go first, and it should be me. Not because it's my job, but because I've lived longer with this silence. I know its shape. I know how it carves you out from the inside. how it convinces you that your thoughts are too heavy for other people to carry. That night after the door closed, I walked back to the table where the teacup still sat. The one I had poured for myself had gone cold. I reheated it not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do. I sat there cupping the mug in both hands and whispered out loud, "Why didn't you say something?" It wasn't an accusation. It was a question to myself, the kind that hangs in the air like a thread you're afraid to pull. I could have spoken. I could have. But when silence becomes your second skin shedding, it feels like peeling something raw and soft and far too honest. There's a strange power in voicing your needs. It risks rejection, but it also risks connection. I've been so afraid of the former that I've robbed myself of the latter. I thought speaking would make me look weak, but it's the silence that's made me small. The next morning I wrote the words down, not in a letter, not in a message, but in my journal. That has become my practice now. When I can't say it aloud, I write it. I write the things I wish I could say. I write the almosts as if they were real. I give them space. I wrote, "I almost asked you to stay. I almost let you see me. I almost said I miss being seen." And in writing them, I realized something. The truth is already inside me, ready. It just needs practice, like a muscle, like a song I've forgotten the melody to, but the lyrics still live somewhere in my chest. So the next time they visit, I'll try again. I won't aim for something big. Maybe I'll start small. Can we sit for a few minutes? Would you like to hear a story from when you were little? Could you help me with something I've been putting off? Because asking isn't weakness, it's invitation, and I want to invite them back in, not into my kitchen, but into my life, into my thoughts, into the parts of me they've forgotten to ask about because I've been too quiet to remind them they exist. Next time I won't almost speak. I will. There are entire parts of me that I left behind without ceremony. They didn't vanish all at once. They faded slowly like photographs left too long in the sun. I used to draw. Not well, maybe, but enough to feel something stir when the pencil moved across the paper. I liked sketching trees, hands the folds in fabric. Quiet things. I used to sing to myself while washing dishes. I used to collect little poems from magazines and tape them to the inside of cabinet doors where no one could see them. I used to have favorites, favorite songs, favorite flowers, favorite times of day. And somewhere along the way I stopped remembering what those were. Not because I didn't care, but because I convinced myself there wasn't room. The house needed cleaning. The kids needed tending. The groceries needed buying. The husband needed supporting. The needs stacked on top of each other like folded linen, so neat, so orderly, until there was no space left for me to unfold. I used to love the color blue, not just any blue, the pale kind like early morning sky. I wore it once in a blouse with little pearl buttons. I felt beautiful in it. But when it tore at the shoulder one afternoon while I was lifting a laundry basket, I mended it quickly, then wore it less and less. Eventually, it disappeared. I don't remember giving it away, but it's gone now, like so much else. I didn't make a conscious choice to erase myself. I just didn't resist the erosion. Piece by piece, the things that made me me were pushed aside. I thought I was just setting them down for a while. But then the years came loud and full, and they filled the space where my voice used to live. No one asked what I thought about the news. No one wondered what kind of books I liked. They asked what was for dinner. They asked where their clean socks were. They asked when the bills were due, and I always knew the answer. I was the keeper of everyone's lives, but my own. And I let that happen, because I told myself that being a good mother, a good wife, a good woman, meant making yourself into whatever others needed. I told myself that my happiness would come from theirs. that if they were full, I wouldn't notice my own hunger. But hunger doesn't disappear just because you look away from it. There were times I felt it sharply, sitting in the car outside the grocery store, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to, lying in bed at night staring at the ceiling and feeling like something inside me was whispering, "You used to be more than this." But I always shushed that voice, told it to quiet down. There were things to do, people to care for. I wonder now how much of myself they truly know. They know my routines. They know my recipes. But do they know the way I loved old films with black and white shadows and soft music? Do they know that I used to write poems on napkins, that I once dreamed of opening a tiny flower shop, just a corner space that smelled like soil and jasmine? No, they don't, because I never told them, because I thought those dreams were too small, too selfish, too far away from what they needed me to be. And in not telling them, I lost the stories that belonged only to me. It's not their fault. They saw a woman who seemed content, who never asked for more, who wore tiredness like it was grace, and they believed the version of me that I kept performing. I made it so easy to forget me, even I forgot myself. But something has shifted now. I can feel it when I pass the old art supply aisle in the store, when I hum a song under my breath and catch myself smiling, when I find an old picture of me in my 20s standing in a field of tall grass, holding a journal in my hand. That girl had ideas. She had thoughts that weren't written in grocery lists or appointment reminders. She had stories. And maybe she's still in here waiting. I think it's time to reclaim those parts, not with fanfare, not with declarations, but with small acts of remembering. Buying a sketch pad again, even if the lines are shaky. Picking a flower just because it's beautiful. Wearing blue even if no one notices. Because it matters that I notice. I want to find the things I lost by staying quiet. The softness in my voice when I read poetry aloud. The joy of singing without thinking about who might hear. The spark that comes from telling someone I used to love this, and letting them see me as more than their history keeper. Maybe that's how I start to come back to myself, by gathering up the fragments with both hands and whispering, "You are still here. You are still allowed." I won't recover everything. Some of it is gone, buried under years and choices I can't undo. But I can choose now. I can begin again. I can stop waiting for someone else to ask who I am, and start telling them instead. Even if the only person listening is me. It was a quiet decision, not a grand declaration, not a cry for attention. Just a moment, one of those slow sinking realizations that arrives like dusk, steady, unhurried, impossible to ignore. I had been coughing more than usual, feeling dizzy, when I stood too quickly, the kind of fatigue that sleep didn't cure. I told myself it was just age. I told myself it would pass. But somewhere deep down I knew it was more than that. Still, I didn't tell anyone. Not my children. Not my neighbors. Not even the doctor at first. I let weeks pass, then months. When the coughing got worse, I finally made an appointment by bus alone. I didn't want to worry anyone. I told myself it wasn't worth the fuss. I told myself this is what strong women do. They handle things. So I sat in that waiting room by myself, filling out forms with shaky hands. I answered the nurse's questions with my usual practice smile. I listened carefully when the doctor spoke about tests and scans and follow-ups, and I nodded calm and composed, as if I hadn't just heard the words abnormal and urgent. I thanked him. I left. I went home. And I didn't tell a soul. Not because I didn't want support, but because I didn't know how to ask for it anymore. That's the part no one tells you the longer you go, without leaning on anyone, the harder it gets to even remember how. I had trained myself to carry things quietly, and now even this fear, this vulnerability, had to fit inside the same old silence. I cooked dinner that night like nothing had changed, set the table, asked about their day, laughed at a story I barely heard, and when they left, I sat at the table alone and felt the weight of the words I hadn't said settle on my shoulders like an old familiar coat. I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of being invisible as I did. Over the next few weeks, I went to 2 more appointments, took taxis, sometimes buses, held my own hand in waiting rooms. No one asked where I was going. No one noticed the new pills in the medicine cabinet. No one saw how slowly I moved, how carefully I sat down, how often I stared into the distance and forgot what day it was. I kept it all to myself, not because they wouldn't care, I know they would, but because I'd spent so many years presenting myself as someone who didn't need anything. I didn't know how to rewrite the script. I didn't want them to see me as fragile. I didn't want their pity. But more than that, I didn't want their shock. I didn't want the look that says, "Why didn't you tell me?" Because I wouldn't know how to answer. I didn't tell them because I didn't know how to speak anymore without minimizing myself. Every sentence felt too large in my mouth. Every feeling felt like an inconvenience. And yet somewhere inside I wanted someone to notice. I wanted someone to ask the right question, to say, "You don't seem quite like yourself lately," or "Can I come with you to the doctor?" I wanted that, and I hated myself for wanting it. But one evening I slipped. Not physically, not drastically, just one small, unnoticed moment. I was making tea and the cup fell from my hand. It shattered, the sound sharp and startling. I stood there, frozen, staring at the broken pieces, and I realized I couldn't bend down fast enough to clean it up. My knees wouldn't allow it. My body ached in ways that felt permanent. That's when my granddaughter walked in. She saw the shards, saw me frozen in place, and for the first time, in a long time, she looked at me. Really looked. "Grandma," she said softly, "are you okay?" I wanted to say yes. Reflexively, I almost did, but something inside me cracked wider than that cup, something old and aching and honest, and instead I whispered, "No. I don't think I am." Just those 6 words, but they tasted like something I hadn't had in years. Not pity, not shame, but truth. She stepped toward me. She didn't say anything grand. She just knelt carefully and started picking up the broken pieces, and I stood there watching, feeling something warm and unbearable begin to rise in my chest. Not grief this time, but relief. It was a beginning, a small one, but it was real. I still haven't told them everything. I'm not sure I will, but that night showed me something. When you let yourself be seen, truly seen, even in weakness, you give others permission to love you more fully. And maybe love isn't in how much you hide. Maybe it's in how much you're willing to reveal. I've gone through too many quiet hardships, but I don't want to keep adding to that pile. Not anymore. Because strength isn't pretending you're not scared. It's saying I'm scared and letting someone sit with you in that space. Even if just for a moment. It was a Sunday afternoon when my youngest granddaughter sat beside me on the porch swing, kicking her legs back and forth like a metronome, keeping time with the creaking of the chains. The sun was warm on our faces, the kind of golden light that softens everything it touches. She was holding a notebook and a crayon drawing something I couldn't quite make out. I watched her for a while, the furrow in her brow, the concentration in her little fingers, until she looked up at me and asked with pure, unfiltered curiosity, "Grandma, why are you so quiet?" I blinked. Not because I hadn't heard the question, but because no one had asked it before, not like that. Not without judgment, not with exasperation, just wonder. Why am I so quiet? I smiled and gave a half answer, something like, "I'm just thinking." But the truth followed me for the rest of the day. That question echoed louder than anything I'd heard in years. Why am I so quiet? I didn't used to be, not always. As a girl, I was full of words. I used to talk to animals, to flowers, to the sky. I made up stories for my dolls, whispered secrets to the wind, sang songs in the bathtub at the top of my lungs. My mother used to laugh and say, "Your voice fills the whole house, little bird." Somewhere between then and now, I stopped chirping. I stopped being a bird and became a shadow. And I started to wonder, what would it sound like if I spoke again? That night, after the house had settled into its familiar hush, I pulled out one of my old notebooks. Not the kind for grocery lists or appointments, but the one I'd tucked away hidden in the back of a drawer, where things go to be forgotten or protected. I'm not sure which. I opened to the first blank page. I held the pen for a long time before it touched paper. My hand shook slightly. I had almost forgotten the feeling of giving shape to a thought of watching something form that only existed inside me. But eventually the words came. Today she asked why I'm so quiet, and I didn't know what to say, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I've had so many, and none of them felt simple enough for a child to understand. I'm quiet because I learned that silence keeps the peace. I'm quiet because I believed my needs weren't urgent. I'm quiet because I thought that's what love looked like, invisible, constant, uncomplaining. But now I'm starting to feel the weight of everything I've never said. I wrote until my hand ached, pages and pages of small truths, small griefs, small joys I never let breathe. I wrote about birthdays, about tired mornings, about the pain of being passed over in conversation. I wrote about how it feels to watch the people you love build lives that no longer include you as anything more than a distant warmth, like a light left on in the window of a house they no longer visit. I wrote about how much I miss being asked how I feel, how much I miss being curious about myself. And then I wrote something I didn't expect. Maybe I'm not quiet. Maybe I've just been unheard. The words stopped me. Because that's the heart of it, isn't it? I never stopped having thoughts. I never stopped feeling deeply. I never stopped wanting. I just stopped believing anyone wanted to listen. My silence wasn't a lack of sound. It was a habit built from rooms where my voice went unanswered. But that one question from a child, a single innocent thread, began to unravel years of tightly wound quiet. And now that I've pulled it, I can't stop. I don't want to. The next day, I told my granddaughter about the garden I used to keep, the way I used to grow marigolds and basil, and let the mint take over just because I loved the smell. She listened. She asked questions. She told me I should plant some again. I laughed, not because the idea was silly, but because it had never occurred to me that someone might want to know those things, that someone might want to hear my voice. It made me wonder how much I've left unsaid simply because I didn't think it mattered. How many thoughts I let dissolve before they reached my tongue. How many feelings I packaged in silence and labeled unimportant. But maybe there's still time. Maybe the voice I thought I lost is still here, just waiting for me to sit down and let her speak again. Not loudly, not with force, but with the steady grace of someone who finally believes her words are worth the breath they take. So the next time someone asks me a question, no matter how small, I won't answer with just a smile. I'll answer with a story, with a memory, with a piece of myself. Because I'm not just someone who listens. I'm someone who remembers, who feels, who still has things to say. There's something sacred about writing by hand, the way the pen moves across the page, the soft scratch of ink carving thoughts into something permanent. It's quiet, but not silent, like the difference between loneliness and solitude. In writing, I don't feel invisible. I feel witnessed, even if the only eyes reading the words are my own. I've begun writing again, not just occasionally, but every evening now. After dinner, after the dishes, after the hum of the day has died down and the house feels still enough to breathe. I sit at the same kitchen table where I used to cut coupons and pack lunches, and I let my mind wander in places it hasn't visited in years. The pages are not filled with complaints. They're filled with confessions. I write about what I miss, like the sound of someone saying my name just because they want to, not because they need something. I write about how it feels to spend the entire day in a house where no one speaks to you, unless you speak first. I write about the strange ache of remembering who I was before I was mom, before I was wife, before I became someone defined only by what I gave. I write about joy too, the joy of holding a warm cup of tea with both hands, the joy of hearing birds in the morning and knowing that for a moment the world still sings, the joy of seeing a neighbor wave across the street. Small joys, but real. Sometimes I pretend I'm writing to someone who cares deeply about the thoughts of an old woman, not because I'm family, not because they owe me anything, but because they simply see me. I imagine them reading my words and nodding, not interrupting, just listening, and it brings a comfort I hadn't expected. There's a kind of safety in the page that I haven't found in people for a long time. The page doesn't judge. It doesn't talk over me. It doesn't forget my birthday. It just waits patiently until I'm ready. And for the first time in years, I'm starting to feel like I matter to someone again, even if that someone is the voice inside me that I buried beneath decades of caretaking and quiet. The funny thing is, the more I write, the more I find I want to say out loud. I've started slipping little truths into conversation. When my daughter called the other day for once not to ask for help, but just to check in, I didn't say I'm fine automatically. I said, "Today was a bit hard, actually." There was a pause on the line, a real silence, and then she said, "Tell me about it." So I did. Not everything, not the full ache, but a small slice, a quiet truth, and she listened, really listened. That single exchange felt like someone opening a window in a room that's been stuffy for years. It reminded me that connection isn't built from grand gestures. It's built from truth, shared, even when that truth is messy, even when it makes others uncomfortable, even when it makes me uncomfortable. I've been afraid of that kind of truth my whole life, afraid it would make people leave, afraid it would make them pity me. But I think what I've really been afraid of is being known. Because being known means being vulnerable, and vulnerability is not something I was taught to trust. I was taught to hold things in, keep things clean, tidy, contained. But life doesn't stay in neat little boxes. It spills, it bruises, it forgets, it forgives. I'm learning that my voice matters not because it's loud, but because it's mine, because it carries the weight of years, because it holds stories that no one else can tell. And if I don't speak them, if I don't write them, they'll vanish, and I'll vanish with them. Not anymore. Last night I wrote something that made my hands tremble. I have always loved too quietly, and now I want to be heard. That's the truth. The soft, aching, liberating truth. I still love them, my family, my children, my grandchildren. I would still do anything for them, but I'm no longer willing to disappear in the process. I don't want to be a memory that smells like cinnamon and laundry soap and long silences. I want to be alive in their minds, full of voice, full of light, full of flaws and humor and opinions. I want them to know me not just as the woman who fed them, bathed them, held them, helped them, but as the woman who was and still is her own story. I close my journal now each night with a whisper, not a prayer, not a wish, but a promise. I will not go silent again. It started with a word so small it nearly disappeared before it left my lips. I was on the phone with my daughter. She was asking kindly as always if I could watch the kids next weekend while she and her husband went away for a few days. I almost said yes, like I always do. It was already forming. Of course, whatever you need. But something in me paused, not sharply, not with anger, just paused. And instead I said, "No, sweetheart, not this time." Silence followed. Not the heavy kind, just surprise. "Oh," she said after a moment. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said softly, truthfully. "I'm just a little tired. I was hoping to have some time to myself." There was another pause. I braced myself for guilt, for frustration, for that subtle drop in her tone that might make me feel like I was letting her down. But it didn't come. She just said, "Okay, Mom, I understand." And that was it. But it wasn't just it was everything. That tiny word "no" rippled through me like water waking in a still pond. I hung up the phone and sat very still as if I had spoken a spell and wasn't sure what it would summon. I wasn't used to that sound coming from my mouth. I wasn't used to choosing myself even in such a small way. But it felt right. It felt like a window opening. That no wasn't rejection. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't the beginning of distance. It was the beginning of a new kind of presence, one that included me. For so long I had said yes automatically. Yes to babysitting. Yes to borrowing money. Yes to holiday hosting. Yes to quiet inconvenience. I said yes because I thought love meant never disappointing anyone. Because I thought being needed was the same as being loved. But I'm starting to learn being loved should include being considered, being asked, and having the space to say no without fear of losing someone's affection. I used to think boundaries were walls, but now I see them as doors, doors I can open and close not to shut people out but to let myself breathe. That first no gave me permission to begin noticing where else I'd been saying yes when I didn't want to, where else I had been squeezing myself into shapes that didn't fit. I began to catch myself in those moments, the slight tension in my chest, the quiet voice inside that whispered, "You don't actually want this." And I started to listen. I said no to attending a social gathering that always left me drained. I said no to lending money that I couldn't afford to part with. I even said no to a dish I didn't feel like cooking and made myself something different for the first time in years. And each time, nothing terrible happened. The world didn't collapse. The people I loved didn't vanish. The sky didn't darken. In fact, what happened was the opposite. I felt lighter. Not weightless, but less burdened. More myself. I didn't become harsh. I didn't become selfish. I became clear. I started to know myself again. What I liked, what I didn't, what I could carry, and what was no longer mine to hold. It's astonishing how much space grows inside you once you stop filling it with things you never truly chose. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a book, one I picked up just for pleasure, not because someone recommended it or gave it to me. I sipped tea I brewed for myself, not for anyone else, and I watched the clouds drift overhead, as if the world were exhaling alongside me. That day, my granddaughter came outside and asked if she could sit with me. I nodded, smiling, and she asked, "What are you reading, Grandma?" For the first time in a long while, I didn't rush to simplify. I didn't say, "Oh, nothing," or "just a story." I told her exactly what I was reading. I told her what I liked about it. And she listened not because she understood all the words, but because she saw me talking about something that belonged to me. It was a small moment, but I think she'll remember it. And maybe one day when she's older and the world starts to ask her to fold herself into roles too small for who she truly is, maybe she'll remember that her grandmother once said no, and it didn't make anyone love her less. Maybe she'll learn to say it sooner. Maybe the echo of my quiet rebellion will live on in her. Because I've realized my voice doesn't have to be loud to be heard. It just has to be true. And saying no was the truest thing I've said in a long time. I used to believe my silence was an offering, that every time I swallowed my pain, I was giving them peace. That every time I held back my disappointment, I was shielding them from guilt. That love meant absorbing everything, holding it in, tucking it away where no one could see it. I wore my silence like a soft shawl, comforting and familiar, woven with threads of devotion, worry, and pride. But now I see it clearly. My silence wasn't kindness. It was self-erasure. And it didn't just hurt me. It hurt them too. Because silence isn't neutral. It teaches. It shapes. It sets the rhythm of a household. And mine taught them that my needs weren't urgent, that my voice wasn't necessary, that comfort was something I gave, never something I received. I thought I was making their lives easier. Maybe I did, but I also made it harder for them to truly know me. I think about all the times I stood at the edge of saying something. I'm tired. I'm sad. I feel left out. And instead chose a smile, a nod, a quiet retreat. I thought I was being gracious, but the truth is I was afraid that saying those things would somehow lessen their love for me, or worse, that it wouldn't change anything at all, that maybe I would speak up and still be unheard. I don't know which fear was heavier, being misunderstood or being understood and dismissed. There's a pain in realizing you've spent your whole life softening your edges so others wouldn't scrape themselves on your truth. I bent myself into something smaller, something gentler, thinking that would keep the peace. But peace without voice isn't peace. It's just absence. And the worst part, they don't even know. They don't know I cried in the bathroom on Christmas morning because no one noticed I hadn't opened a single gift. They don't know I once hid in the garage during a family argument because I couldn't bear to be the referee again. They don't know I stared at myself in the mirror before a birthday dinner and wondered if anyone would say I looked nice. No one did, and I said nothing. Because that was my role, the silent one, the strong one, the one who always understood. But understanding doesn't mean I didn't feel hurt. Strength doesn't mean I didn't ache. And silence doesn't mean I didn't have anything to say. It just means I believed somewhere along the way that my words had no place at the table I helped build. And I don't want that anymore. I want to be honest, not cruel, not bitter, just true. I want to speak plainly, to say that hurt me when it does, to say I'd like to be asked when I've been overlooked, to say I need help when I do. Because pretending I don't feel pain doesn't protect anyone. It just isolates me. And I've lived enough years inside that isolation. The irony is, they call me strong because I never break. But what they don't see is that I've been breaking all along, just quietly in ways that leave no visible pieces. But I'm learning now that there's courage in the cracks, that a voice that's been quiet for too long doesn't need to shout. It just needs to speak, even trembling, even low, even slowly. Last week I had dinner with my family. We sat around the table the same way we have for years, laughter noise, the clatter of plates, and then my son said something that stung, not cruelly, just thoughtlessly. He joked about how I always go with the flow, how I never really mind anything. and for the first time I looked up and said, "That's not true." The room quieted. "I've just never said anything before," I added, voice steady but soft. He blinked. "Oh, I didn't know." "I know," I said. "That's why I'm saying it now." No one argued. No one rolled their eyes. They just listened. And I felt something I haven't felt in a long time, not just heard, but respected. It was a small exchange, but it marked a shift, not just in how they see me, but in how I see myself. Because silence doesn't make you noble. It makes you vanish. And I've vanished long enough. So I'm letting myself speak now, one sentence at a time, not out of bitterness, not to demand, just to exist more fully, to fill the air with the shape of my life. And maybe, just maybe, that will teach them something too, that love doesn't have to be quiet, to be real. I sat on the porch yesterday evening with my old diary open in my lap. The pages fluttered in the breeze, filled with handwriting that had grown a little shakier over the years, but still belonged entirely to me. I flipped through them slowly, like turning the leaves of a tree I had grown myself. Every line held something I had never said aloud. Memories, confessions, hopes I thought I'd buried for good. There was a strange peace in seeing them all together, a kind of evidence that I had lived deeply, even if quietly, that I had felt, even if no one ever asked. And it struck me as the wind touched my cheek and the light began to fade that I had spent so many years thinking my silence was a virtue. But in truth, it was a wound I called wisdom. I used to believe that being loved meant being needed, that my value was wrapped in the roles I played, the cook, the caregiver, the listener, the one who never asked for anything. But roles aren't identities, and needs are not weaknesses. I wish someone had told me that when I was younger. I wish I had told myself. Because now I understand something simple and painful and freeing. I didn't blame my children for not seeing me. I blamed myself for making it so easy to overlook me. But I don't need to carry that blame anymore. I've begun to forgive the version of me who stayed quiet. She didn't know another way. She thought love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant silence. She thought speaking up would make everything fall apart. She didn't know, not yet, that sometimes speaking is the only thing that can hold everything together. I've learned that a voice doesn't have to echo through a room to matter. It can be a whisper that finally reaches your own ears. It can be the sound of a truth long hidden finally coming home. I still do the things I've always done. I make tea. I fold blankets. I warm leftovers with the same care I've always given. But now I also ask. I say, "Can you help me with this?" I say I'd rather not today. I say I have something I'd like to share. And I've seen it, the change. Small, yes, but real. My daughter lingered longer after dinner last week, asked what I was reading, and actually listened when I answered. My granddaughter asked if I'd teach her to make my favorite soup, not because she wanted the recipe, but because she wanted me beside her telling stories while the pot simmered. My son called just to talk. No requests, just talk. I didn't expect any of it. I didn't demand it. I just made space for it by no longer filling every moment with unspoken endurance. This voice of mine, it's softer than most, weathered, gentle, but it's mine. And I've come to love it. I've come to sit beside it like an old friend who forgives me for being late. And maybe that's the real gift of age, not becoming invisible, but learning how to reappear. Not loudly, not urgently, but fully. So when people ask me now, "Why did you stay so quiet for so long?" I don't flinch. I don't hide. I just say the truth. Because I thought I had to, but I don't anymore. I may never be the woman who fills a room with her presence, but I am the woman who fills a page with her soul. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. Because the truth is, I was never silent. I was just waiting for a moment when it felt safe enough to be heard. And I have finally found that moment. Now the house is quiet, but not the kind of quiet that used to ache. It's a gentle hush like the soft settling of dust on a bookshelf you've finally decided to open again. The rooms feel lighter now, not because they're less full, but because I no longer carry the weight of all I didn't say. I sit by the window as the light fades, and I let the stillness wrap around me like an old quilt. Outside, the world continues its dance. Cars pass birds, call the wind rustles through the trees, and inside I feel something I haven't in years, peace. Not because everything has been fixed, not because the past has changed, but because I have changed. I speak now even if softly. I ask even if it feels awkward. I share even if my voice trembles. And I listen not just to others but to myself, to the quiet stirrings that used to get buried beneath everyone else's needs. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to be dramatic. I just need to be true. And that's enough. They may never understand everything I held inside. They may never ask about the pain I turned into poems or the meals I made while hiding my tears. But that's okay, because I remember, I carry it, and I've finally let it breathe. I gave them silence, and in it I found myself. They forgot me sometimes, but I will not forget me again, because I don't need to be needed to belong. I don't need to give everything to be loved. I just need to be heard, even if only by the woman I see in the mirror. And now finally I am.